I need to show you 5 statistics about church giving that most pastors don't know. And honestly, they are totally brutal. But if you care about the future of your church, you need to know these. Let's do this. Well, hey guys, I'm Thomas here from Reach Right, and we put out new content like this every single week. So if this is helpful to you and your ministry, it would mean a lot to me if you would subscribe to this channel. So let me get this out of the way. You don't like talking about money. I don't like talking about money, but this is something that we probably need to talk about. I unpacked a handful of statistics, and when I read these, I was absolutely floored. So rather than just avoiding the topic and not talking about money, let's rip the Band-Aid off and unpack some of the things we're learning about giving in churches right now that I think might change the way that you think about giving in your church. All right, stat number 1, and on this one I had to go back and double check the source because I just couldn't believe it when I saw it. It actually comes from Ministry Brands, and I'm going to leave a link down below to all the stats we talk about in this video. And here it is, only 5% of regular churchgoers actually tithe. Yeah, you heard me right. Only 5%. Now, when I talk about tithing, I'm talking about a full 10% of their income. Let's just say you're a typical 100-member church. That means you probably have about 5 people in your church that are giving a full tithe. And assuming that some of them are married or couples, that means maybe 2 or 3 families are giving tithes to your church. Pretty crazy, right? Now, here's the real kicker, is that half of all church attenders, and I'm talking about regular attenders, they give 2% of their income or less. Now, before you go getting all frustrated, I want to make something really clear. This is not a generosity issue. I believe it's a discipleship issue. Maybe we're quick to think if 95% of our church doesn't tithe, it must be that they're somehow greedy or want to keep more for themselves. But really, in my experience as a pastor of several churches of different sizes, this is more a reflection on me and my own teaching on it. People that give in this way often see giving as an obligation and not a continuation of their act of worship. So before you go diving into tactics and campaigns and saying the exact right words, you just have to ask yourself, am I teaching about giving? Am I discipling my people the way that God has called me to? Because honestly, if we're not, then there's no strategy that I can share with you today that could possibly correct the course. Okay, now stat number 2, it might sound like good news for a second, but trust me, it's gonna probably surprise you. In 2024, churches saw a 1.9% increase in the total amount given. $146 billion were given to churches over the course of 2024. Sounds awesome, right? That's good news. Well, here's the problem. Inflation in that same time was close to 3%. So that 1.9% increase in giving actually is a 1% decrease in the actual purchasing power. So while we're celebrating that we're seeing an increase, if we're not seeing an increase that's bigger than inflation, we're actually losing our ability to spread the gospel. And this probably doesn't surprise you. I hear from pastors all the time that are telling me that they're seeing an increase in their giving, but they still feel like things are tighter than ever and they're having to make some really hard choices. Maybe you're in that same kind of a boat. Well, if that's your church, we're going to get to some solutions a little later in the video, but just know this, you're not alone. It's something that so many of us are facing. Now, stat 3 was really alarming to me, and I call it the 40-year decline. You have to hear this. Back in '83, of all charitable giving across the entire country, 63% of it went to the local church. Any guess what that number might be today? Well, it's 24%, from 63 to 24%. So that's saying that 2 out of every $3 that was given in 1983 was given to a local church. Today, it's less than 1 in $4, a huge shift. And here's what that all tells me, is that Christians, we are still generous, but we're just not giving to the same places that we used to. We're much more likely to give to parachurch organizations than we are to our local church body. So the big question I have to ask is, why? Why are churches all over the country choosing to fund clean water projects in Africa instead of funding churches doing clean water projects in Africa? Why are we giving to homeless shelters directly instead of having our churches provide homeless ministry? I'm not saying this is all wrong, and we're absolutely for nonprofits that are not part of churches, but I do believe that the biblical model for giving is that we give to the house of the Lord where we ourselves worship. I have a few ideas as to why. I think part of it is trust. I think part of it is vision that we have as churches. And I think part of it is we're not doing a great job of telling stories that convince people that their giving is making an eternal impact. I think if we want to get better in this area, we have to get better at casting vision and telling stories that will compel people to believe and to trust our churches to be the best way to not just meet needs in our communities and across the world, but to actually take the gospel to the ends of the earth. Because to a lot of Christians right now, they're voting with their pocketbooks and they feel that their dollars are better spent outside the church than it is inside. And to me, that's just sad. All right, stat number 4, and this one hits a little different for me because we're not just talking about nominal Christians, but get this. 37% of regular churchgoers give nothing. Give $0. They didn't make a gift in the entire course of a year. This is not just people that say they're Christians. This is people that say they regularly go to church. $0, no gifts, no donations whatsoever to their local church. These are people that probably serve in your youth ministry and help with your kids and packing up chairs, and they're bringing foods to potlucks, but they're just not invested financially. But I hope I don't sound too judgmental about this, because to me, this is not so much about attendance, it's more about ownership. That's what this lack of giving shows. I think a lot of people see church as a free public service, and they consume the teaching, they consume the worship, their kids enjoy the services, but they don't see themselves as owners of the church's mission. And honestly, I have to say this again, this is probably more of a leadership problem. If someone has been in your church for 6 months and they're not actively giving towards the mission of your church, I think chances are you haven't clearly communicated that this is our church and not my church as the leader. And here's the truth that I've found in ministry is that when people don't give, people don't stay. I know it seems counterintuitive. We're so worried that if we talk too much about giving, people will want to leave, when really the opposite is true. People that are giving rarely leave churches, but those that don't give regularly are the most likely to leave. So how do we close the gap? Well, we have to talk about it. Don't be afraid ever to talk about giving, and certainly don't ever apologize when you talk about giving. A pastor mentor of mine shared that with me, and it was totally life-changing. Now, finally, the 5th stat, and this one, to be honest, has kept me up at night. The people over at the Christian Stewardship Network found that 21.2% of all church donations comes from the top 1% of givers at every church. So 21% comes from the top 1%. So let me break that all down for you. I am an executive pastor at my church. We average about 300 people, and we have about $1 million a year in annual revenue. So listen, 3 people from within our church, they represent about $210,000 a year of annual giving if we're in line with the averages. Isn't that pretty crazy? And I don't mean to make us scared. We have no reason to fear with the Lord behind us. But the reality is a lot of our churches are built on a financial house of cards. Because what happens if that one family moves, or that one family gets sick, or God forbid you say something that offends that one family, whether right or wrong? Well, it can radically shift the amount of impact you can have in your ministry. I've seen it happen so many times, and I've talked to so many pastors that have found themselves in this predicament. And I'll say this, it's especially challenging for smaller churches because usually that's all riding on one person. One person a lot of times is 20% of your church's income. And when that's the case, it's a recipe for disaster. So here's the question is, how do we build a church that's healthy and not based on just the giving of 1 to 3 major donors? Well, the answer is we need broad-based giving. We need more people giving, even if it's smaller amounts to our churches. Any day of the week, I would take 100 people giving $100 over one person giving $10,000. Okay, I know I just hit you with 5 brutal statistics, but here's the good news. These problems are solvable, at least on a local church level. But I'm not going to give you a solution that involves getting the right kind of app or making sure your verbiage is tailored in on your website. I just have a few really practical things that I think any church can implement if you put your mind to it over the next few weeks. Let me give them to you. Here's something that I've learned, having helped hundreds of churches and pastoring a few of my own, is that the churches that are thriving financially aren't the ones with the richest people, they're the ones with the clearest vision. When people know where their dollars are going and they see the actual impact and they know that they are making a difference, they are more likely to give no matter what their financial situation looks like. So if you're a pastor and you're watching this and you're thinking, man, these stats, they sound all too familiar. It sounds a lot like my church. I have 3 things I want to leave you with. Number 1, start talking about generosity more often. Like I said, don't ever apologize for it. It is a blessing when you teach people about what biblical generosity looks like. If we really believe what the word says about generosity, it is a blessing for people to learn about this. I know for me, my life was changed radically when I started getting serious about tithing as a very young Christian. I believe that people in your church have that same blessing in store for them, but you cannot shy away from talking about it. Number 2, cast vision relentlessly. Every single week, without question, you need to be casting vision, especially when you start talking about the offering and the giving time at your church. Don't ever just skip over this. Make sure every time you talk about giving, you give people a compelling reason as to why you should give and the kind of impact that their gifts are making. And number 3, you need to make giving easy. I think the biggest opportunity for so many churches is encouraging people to give a recurring gift to their church. My daughter, who's 20, told me this week that after a long time debating about it, she set up a recurring gift at her church just to be more reliable when it comes to giving. I think we need to know that people want to do this. They want to be regular about giving. They just need the tools, and we need to make it easy for them to do that. So make sure your website and your online giving system are completely dialed in, and remove any friction you possibly can to make giving easy for people. And look, I know a lot of this isn't easy. I know a lot of us dread talking about money, but you need to hear this. While it's more fun to talk about ministry opportunities and great outreaches, if we don't have the financial basis for it, all those things can no longer happen. So let's get serious, let's correct some of these stats, and let's get to it together. If you're looking for some better methods to talk about giving in your church, I did a video that breaks down exactly how I do it at my church. I think this is the next video you should watch and take that step to fix some of those giving challenges you have.